The screech of tires cut through the afternoon air like a knife. Officer Kim gripped his steering wheel as his patrol car chased the stolen vehicle through the narrow streets of Seoul. The suspect's car weaved between traffic, running red lights and forcing other drivers to slam their brakes. Unit 47 in pursuit, heading south on Gangnam Boulevard, Kim radioed, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The stolen car ahead was picking up speed. And Kim knew this chase was getting dangerous. Lee wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag as he stood outside his auto repair shop. The sound of sirens grew louder, and he looked up to see two cars racing toward the intersection ahead. Time seemed to slow as he watched the stolen vehicle blow through the red light directly into the path of a delivery truck. The impact was massive. The stolen car flipped twice before crashing into a concrete barrier, while Kim's patrol car skidded sideways and slammed into a lamppost. The metal twisted and sparks flew as the police cruiser rolled onto its side. Lee dropped his tools and ran toward the wreckage. Other people on the street stood frozen, some pulling out their phones to record, others just staring in shock. Black smoke was already rising from Kim's overturned patrol car, and Lee could see orange flames starting to lick at the engine compartment. "Hey, are you okay in there?" Lee shouted as he approached the damaged vehicle. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he could see Kim moving inside. Dazed and struggling, Kim's head was bleeding, and his uniform was torn. His seat belt had jammed in the crash, trapping him as the car filled with smoke. The smell of burning oil and hot metal grew stronger. By the second, "I can't get out," Kim called back, his voice weak. "The belt won't release." Lee didn't think twice. He grabbed a tire iron from the street, where it had fallen from another damaged car, and began smashing. In the driver's side window, the safety glass, cracked but held together in a web pattern, stand back from the window. Lee yelled, then struck it again with more force. This time the glass gave way, creating an opening big enough for a person to fit through. The heat hit Lee's face as he peered inside. The flames under the hood were growing larger, and he could hear the crackling sound of fire consuming the car's interior. Kim was still conscious but trapped, his leg pinned under the twisted dashboard. "Listen, I'm going to pull you out, but this might hurt," Lee said, climbing halfway through the window opening. The metal edges scraped against his arms, but he ignored the pain. Other bystanders finally began to move. Someone shouted that they had called the fire department, while another person directed traffic round the accident scene. But Lee knew there wasn't time to wait for help. He reached across Kim and pulled out a pocket knife, carefully cutting through the jam seat belt. Kim groaned as Lee worked to free his trapped leg from under the dashboard. The smoke was getting thicker, making both men cough. "Almost got it," Lee muttered, using his shoulder to push against the bent metal. With a grinding sound, the dashboard shifted just enough to free Kim's leg. "Okay, put your arm round my shoulders," Lee instructed. "We're getting out of here now." Kim was heavier than Lee expected, and the awkward angle made it difficult to maneuver through the window. Lee's muscles strained as he pulled the injured officer from the wreckage, both of them scraping against the broken glass and twisted metal. They had barely cleared the vehicle when the fire reached the fuel tank. The explosion knocked both men to the ground, the heat wave washing over them as debris scattered across the street. Lee instinctively covered Kim with his body, protecting him from the falling pieces of burning metal. When the immediate danger passed, Lee helped Kim sit up. Against the curb, the officer was conscious but clearly in pain, holding his injured leg. "Why did you do that?" Kim asked, looking at Lee with confusion. "You could have been killed," Lee shrugged. Checking Kim's wounds, You needed help. That's what people do. The sound of sirens grew louder as emergency vehicles finally arrived on the scene. Paramedics rushed over with a stretcher, quickly checking Kim's vital signs and preparing him for transport to the hospital. As they loaded Kim into the ambulance, he grabbed Lee's arm. "Thank you," he said simply, his eyes sincere. "I won't forget." Lee nodded and stepped back as the ambulance doors closed. He watched the emergency vehicle disappear into traffic, then turned back to survey the burning wreckage of the patrol car. The fire department was already working to extinguish the flames, and news crew had arrived and was interviewing witnesses. But Lee avoided the cameras. He had work to finish at his shop. And the afternoon was getting late as he walked back toward his garage. He had no idea that his simple act of helping another human being had been observed by eyes that were not from this world. 3 days had passed since the accident, and Lee was back to his normal routine at the auto repair shop. The news crews had moved on to other stories, and the burned wreckage had been cleared from the intersection. Life in Seoul continued as if nothing had happened. Lee was under the hood of an old Hyundai when his phone buzzed on the workbench. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, thinking it was probably another telemarketer. But something made him answer. "Hello, Lee's Auto Repair," he said, holding the phone between his shoulder and ear as he continued working. Static filled the line for several seconds. Then a voice came through. Unlike anything Lee had ever heard, it was mechanical, cold, but with an odd rhythm that didn't sound quite human. "Human, Lee," the voice said slowly, as if testing each word. "You saved one of yours. We watched. We are curious." Lee stopped working and grabbed the phone properly. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" But the line was already dead. Lee stared at his phone screen, replaying the strange conversation in his mind. The voice had been so unusual, almost like a computer trying to speak Korean but failing. And what did it mean by "we watched"? He tried calling the number back, but got a message saying it was not in service. Lee shook his head and went back to work, convincing himself it was probably just a prank call. Maybe some kids playing with voice-changing software. That evening, Lee was closing up the shop when his neighbor Minho ran over from the convenience store next door. "Did you see the news?" Minho asked, pointing up at the sky. "They're saying there are strange lights over the city. People are posting videos online." Lee looked up, but saw only the usual orange glow of Seoul's lights reflecting off the low clouds. "I don't see anything. It started about an hour ago," Minho continued, pulling out his phone to show Lee a shaky video. "Look at this. These lights are moving in patterns that don't make sense." The weather service says it's not lightning, and the airport confirmed. No aircraft are scheduled in that area. In the video, Lee could see bright blue and white lights moving across the sky in perfect geometric shapes. They would appear in one spot, hover for a few seconds, then instantly move to another location. Miles away, the lights seemed to pulse with their own energy, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythm that looked almost like communication, probably just military exercises, Lee said, though he felt uneasy. The timing seemed too coincidental after that strange phone call. As they watched, the lights began to appear more frequently. What started as a few scattered dots became dozens of glowing objects moving across the night sky. They formed patterns that looked almost like writing in a language no human had ever seen. Other shop owners came out to look. Jin from the noodle restaurant pointed with excitement at a particularly bright cluster of lights that seemed to be scanning the city below. "They're moving like they're looking for something," he said. The lights suddenly intensified, becoming so bright that they cast shadows on the street below. Lee felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the air itself was charged with electricity. His phone began to buzz erratically, the screen flickering with static. Then, as suddenly as they had intensified, all the lights vanished. The sky returned to its normal dark orange glow, leaving a small crowd of people standing in confused silence. "What was that?" Minho whispered. Lee's phone rang again. Same unknown number. This time he answered immediately. Humanly, the mechanical voice said. "Clearer now. You interest us. Your species acts strangely. You risk yourself for others. This is unexpected. Who are you?" Lee demanded. "What do you want?" "We are observers. We study worlds. We study species. We decide which ones survive their violence, which ones deserve to continue." The words sent a chill down Lee's spine. "What are you talking about? Your world fights itself constantly. Wars, hatred, division. We expected this pattern everywhere. But you save the one who should be your enemy. This confuses our calculations." Lee looked round at his neighbors, who were still staring at the sky and talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. None of them could hear his phone conversation. "Officer Kim isn't my enemy," Lee said. "He's just another person who needed help." There was a long pause on the line. When the voice returned, it sounded different, almost puzzled. "This is why we must understand. Your species may be different from what we observed. We will return tomorrow night. Be ready. Humanly, others will want to speak with you." The line went dead again. This time, when Lee tried to call back, his phone showed no signal at all. He looked up at the sky, suddenly aware that somewhere in the darkness above, something was watching him. The rescue at the intersection hadn't just saved Officer Kim's life. It had caught the attention of beings who held the power to decide humanity's fate, and somehow Lee found himself at the center of something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. The next evening, Lee stayed late at his repair shop, unable to focus on work. Every few minutes he found himself looking up at the sky, wondering if the strange voice on the phone had been real or just his imagination playing tricks on him. Around midnight, the air began to hum with a low frequency that made his tools vibrate on the workbench. Lee stepped outside and immediately noticed that all the street lights in the industrial district had dimmed to a faint orange glow. The usual sounds of the city seemed muffled, as if someone had placed a giant blanket over the entire neighborhood. Then he saw it descending from the clouds. The ship was massive, easily the size of a city block, but it moved with impossible silence. Its surface looked like liquid metal, constantly shifting and flowing as if alive. Patterns of blue light pulsed across its hull in waves, creating designs that hurt to look at directly. The craft didn't have any visible engines or propulsion systems, yet it controlled its descent with perfect precision. Lee's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Same unknown number. "Do not run." Humanly, the mechanical voice said. "We come to understand. You will not be harmed if you cooperate." The ship touched down in the empty lot behind Lee's garage, its landing so gentle that it barely disturbed the dust on the ground. Up close, Lee could see that the vessel's surface was covered in symbols that seemed to move and change, like living text writing itself across the hull. A section of the ship's wall simply dissolved, creating an opening that glowed with soft, white light. 3 figures emerged, and Lee's breath caught in his throat. They were humanoid in shape, but clearly not human. Each stood about 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and pale grey skin that seemed to shimmer under the streetlights. Their heads were larger than a human's, with no visible hair, and their eyes were completely black, like looking into deep space. They moved with fluid grace, as if gravity affected them differently. The center figure approached Lee, while the other two flanked it on either side. When it spoke, Lee could see that it had no visible mouth, yet the words came through clearly, translated somehow directly into Korean. "I am Observer Prime of the Galactic Assessment Division," it said, its voice now perfectly clear and emotionless. "We have traveled many light cycles to study your species and determine its classification." Lee tried to find his voice. Classification? For what? For survival. Observer Prime replied matter-of-factly. "Every species reaches a point where it either learns to control its violent nature or destroys itself. We catalogue civilizations across the galaxy. Those that show promise are invited to join the greater community. Those that do not are prevented from spreading their violence to other worlds." The words hit Lee like a physical blow. These beings were deciding whether humanity lived or died. "Your species has shown consistent patterns of warfare, discrimination, and destruction," Observer Prime continued. "Your history is filled with conflicts based on differences in appearance, beliefs, and territory. This is typical of most primitive civilizations." One of the other aliens stepped forward, holding a device that projected holographic images into the air. Lee watched in horror scenes of human warfare played out before him. Battles from throughout history, riots, conflicts, violence from every era and every continent. "We expected to observe this same pattern when we studied the incident 3 days ago," Observer Prime said. The data indicated that humanly and human Kim represented different social groups that typically show hostility toward each other. The hologram changed to show the accident scene. Lee watched himself pulling Officer Kim from the burning car, seeing the event from an aerial perspective that could only have come from the alien observers. According to our models, human Lee should have ignored human Kim's distress, or possibly even celebrated it. The pattern of intergroup conflict in your species suggested this outcome with 97% probability. Lee found his voice. "Why would I celebrate someone getting hurt? He's a person, just like me." Observer Prime's black eyes seemed to study Lee more intently. "This response contradicts our data. You risked your life for an individual from a different social classification. You gained no benefit from this action. You had no genetic relationship to motivate altruistic behavior. Yet you acted. That's what people do," Lee said, growing more confident. "When someone needs help, you help them. It doesn't matter who they are." The three aliens exchanged glances, communicating in a way that produced no sound, but somehow felt like intense conversation. Finally, Observer Prime spoke again. "Your statement conflicts with extensive observational data of your species. Perhaps this was an anomaly. One individual does not represent an entire civilization." "Then test it," Lee said, surprising himself with his boldness. "Don't judge all of humanity based on news reports and war footage. See how real people actually behave when they're not being manipulated by politicians or extremists." Observer Prime was quiet for a long moment. "An interesting proposal. We had planned to deliver our assessment based on historical analysis, but perhaps direct observation would provide more accurate data." The alien reached into what looked like empty air and pulled out a device that resembled a crystal cube. It pulsed with internal light as Observer Prime held it. "We will conduct an experiment," it announced. "We will observe how humans behave when faced with choices between cooperation and conflict. You, humanly, will participate in this test. If your species demonstrates the compassion you claim is typical, we will reconsider our preliminary assessment." Lee nodded, though his heart was racing. "And if we fail your test?" Observer Prime's expression remained unchanged. Then we will proceed with standard protocol for a violent species. The implication was clear. Humanity's survival now depended on proving that the rescue of Officer Kim wasn't just a random act of kindness, but a true reflection of human nature. Observer. Prime gestured toward the ship, and the opening expanded to accommodate human-sized beings. You will enter our testing facility. We have already collected human Kim from the medical center. He has agreed to participate after we explained the situation to him. Lee hesitated at the threshold of the alien vessel. The interior looked nothing like any human spacecraft he had seen in movies. The walls curved and flowed like living tissue, pulsing with soft bioluminescent patterns. There were no visible controls or instruments, just smooth surfaces that seemed to respond to the aliens' presence. How do I know you won't just eliminate us anyway? Lee asked. You do not, Observer Prime replied honestly. But refusal to participate will be interpreted as confirmation that your species lacks cooperative instincts. The choice is yours. Lee stepped inside. The moment his feet touched the floor, he felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the ship was scanning him. The walls round him shifted, creating a corridor that led deeper into the vessel. They walked through several old chambers filled with technology that defied understanding. Floating screens displayed star maps with thousands of worlds marked in different colors. Red markers far outnumbered any other color, and Lee realized these probably represented civilizations that had failed their assessment. In one chamber, Lee saw Officer Kim waiting with two other humans he didn't recognize. Kim looked pale but determined. His leg was bandaged, but he could walk without assistance. Lee, Kim said, relief evident in his voice. These beings explained everything to me. They said humanity's survival depends on how we handle their test. The other two humans introduced themselves. Park was a teacher from Bizen, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who had been taken from her classroom. Choi was a delivery driver from Incheon, young and nervous, who had been selected while making his evening rounds. We have chosen subjects from different regions and social backgrounds. Observer Prime explained, this will provide a more accurate sample of human behavior patterns. The aliens led them to a large circular chamber with walls that became transparent, revealing the stars beyond. In the center of the room stood a complex structure that looked like a combination of puzzle and obstacle course. It had multiple levels connected by bridges, platforms, and passages that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. Your test is simple, Observer Prime announced. This structure contains 4 separate chambers, each with a different challenge. You must work together to solve all 4 challenges before the time limit expires. A holographic timer appeared in the air, showing 30 minutes counting down. However, Observer Prime continued, each challenge can only be completed by one person, and that person will be sealed inside the chamber until all challenges are solved. If you fail, the person trapped inside will be uncomfortable. The word uncomfortable carried implications that made Lee's stomach tighten. And if we refuse to participate, Park asked, her teacher's instincts making her question the rules, then we will interpret this as evidence that humans cannot cooperate under pressure. Observer Prime replied, the assessment will conclude. Immediately, Choi stepped forward, his nervousness replaced by determination. What are the challenges? Observer Prime gestured, and the structure revealed its interior. The first chamber showed a complex mechanical puzzle with moving parts and flashing lights. The second contained what looked like a maze filled with obstacles. The third chamber had a series of platforms that appeared to require perfect timing to cross. The fourth showed a room filling slowly with some kind of gas, with a control panel that needed to be operated from inside. The final challenge is particularly interesting, Observer Prime said. The gas is harmless, but the person inside will experience increasing discomfort. They must trust that their companions will solve the other challenges quickly enough to free them. Lee realized the brilliant cruelty of the test. It wasn't just about solving puzzles. It was about trust, sacrifice, and whether humans would risk themselves for strangers. "I'll take the gas chamber," Kim said immediately. "No," Lee protested. "You're still injured. I should do it." "I'm the strongest," Choi interrupted. "I can handle whatever that gas does." Park shook her head. "I work with children every day. I'm used to staying calm under pressure. I should go." Observer Prime watched this exchange with what might have been interest. Fascinating. You are arguing about who should face the greatest risk. The timer continued counting down. 28 minutes. "We need to decide now," Lee said. "Kim, you take the mechanical puzzle. You're good with details from police work. Park, you take the maze. Teachers know how to find solutions. Choi, you're young and quick. Take the timing challenge. I'll handle the gas chamber. But what if?" Park started. "No what ifs," Lee interrupted. "We trust each other, or we all fail together." The four humans looked at each other, and Lee saw something in their eyes that he hoped the aliens would recognize. It wasn't just determination. It was the willingness to depend on people they had just met, to trust strangers with their lives. "Ready?" Lee asked. They nodded as one, and stepped toward their respective challenges. The real test of humanity was about to begin. Observer Prime spoke quietly to its companions in their strange silent language, but Lee caught what sounded almost like surprise in their communication. Perhaps they hadn't expected humans to argue about who would face the greatest danger. The chamber doors sealed shut, and the timer showed 26 minutes remaining. The moment the chamber doors sealed, Lee felt the first wisps of gas entering his compartment. It smelled like burning plastic and made his eyes water immediately. Through the transparent walls, he could see his three companions already working on their challenges. Kim attacked the mechanical puzzle with methodical precision, his police training evident as he analyzed each moving part. The device was a complex array of rotating gears, sliding panels, and blinking lights that had to be arranged in a specific sequence. Each time he moved one piece, 3 others would shift, creating a cascade of changes throughout the system. "The pattern is mathematical," Kim called out, his voice carrying through the chamber's communication system. "Each sequence affects the next level. I need about 10 minutes to work through all the combinations." In the maze chamber, Park moved with surprising speed. The pathways kept changing, walls sliding up and down to block routes she had just discovered. But her years of dealing with unpredictable children had taught her to think several steps ahead. She marked her path by leaving small tears in her clothing at each turn, creating a trail she could follow back if needed. "Don't worry about me," Park shouted to the others. "I teach kindergarten. I've seen worse mazes drawn in crayon." Choi faced the most physically demanding challenge. The timing platforms required him to leap from one moving surface to another, each one following a different rhythm. Miss the timing by even a second, and he would fall back to the starting position. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he studied the patterns, calculating the precise moment to make each jump. The gas in Lee's chamber was getting thicker, making him cough and struggle to breathe clearly. His chest began to burn, and his vision started to blur around the edges, but he could see the control panel in front of him. A complex array of buttons and switches that would unlock all the chambers once the other 3 puzzles were solved. "How are you doing in there?" Kim called out, worry evident in his voice. "I'm fine," Lee lied, wiping tears from his stinging eyes. just focus on your puzzle. Observer Prime and the other aliens watched from outside the testing chamber, their black eyes reflecting the lights from the various challenges. They communicated in their silent way. And Lee could sense their intense focus on every human interaction. Kim completed the first section of his puzzle, and a green light appeared on Lee's control panel. 1 down, 3 to go, he announced. Lee, I can see the gas getting thicker. How much time do we have? Lee checked the timer through his blurring vision. 18 minutes. You're doing great. Keep going. Park's voice echoed through the chambers as she navigated her maze. I found the center. There's a crystal here that needs to be activated. Give me 30 seconds. She pressed her hand against a glowing surface, and suddenly the maze wall stopped, moving. Another green light appeared on Lee's panel. Halfway there, Lee called out, though his voice was getting weaker. The gas was making him dizzy, and he had to lean against the wall for a support. Choi had been studying the timing platforms for several minutes, calculating the rhythm in his head. Finally, he began to move. The first jump was perfect, landing him on a platform that immediately began rotating. The second jump required him to leap while the platform spun, landing on a surface that was moving in the opposite direction. Come on, Choi, Kim encouraged, taking a break from his puzzle to watch. You've got this. The young delivery driver made it through the sequence of platforms with impressive athleticism. At the final platform, he had to grab a hanging rope and swing to reach the activation switch. For a moment, he hung in the air, the rope supporting his full weight as he stretched to reach the control. His fingertips brushed the switch, and the third green light illuminated on Lee's panel. By now, Lee was struggling to stay conscious. The gas had filled his chamber completely, and each breath was a struggle. His hands shook as he prepared to work the control panel, but he forced himself to stay focused. 3 people were counting on him. Kim's mechanical puzzle was down to the final sequence. The police officer's methodical approach had paid off, and he could see the solution clearly now. But as he watched Lee swaying in the gas-filled chamber, he worked even faster. Almost there, Kim called out, Lee, stay with us. Not going anywhere, Lee replied. Though his voice was barely a whisper, Kim solved the final section of his puzzle, and the 4th green light appeared on Lee's control panel. Now all 4 humans had completed their individual challenges, but Lee still had to input the correct sequence to unlock all the chambers. The control panel had dozens of buttons, and Lee's vision was so blurred he could barely make out the symbols. But he remembered watching the lights activate in sequence as each puzzle was solved. Using muscle memory and determination, he pressed the buttons in the same order. The chamber doors opened simultaneously, and fresh air rushed into Lee's compartment. He collapsed to his knees, gasping and coughing, but alive. Kim, Park, and Choi rushed to help him, supporting him as his vision slowly cleared. Observer Prime approached the group of humans. Its expression unreadable, interesting. It said simply, each of you chose to prioritize other success over your own safety. Even when facing personal discomfort, humanly continued to encourage his companions rather than demand they work faster. The alien paused, consulting with its companions in their silent language. In our observations of over 3,000 species, we have seen many forms of intelligence, strength, and technology. But this pattern of voluntary sacrifice for unrelated individuals is unusual. It's not unusual for us, Park said, still helping me stay steady. It's just being human. Observer Prime's head tilted slightly. Yes, we are beginning to understand this. Your species has something we have rarely encountered. The ability to extend family-level cooperation to complete strangers, you call it humanity. The alien reached into empty air again and withdrew a different device. This one shaped like a star. It pulsed with golden light as Observer Prime held it. "The Galactic Assessment Division has reached a decision," it announced. "Your species demonstrates consistent patterns of mutual aid and sacrifice that override individual survival instincts. This is not weakness, as we initially calculated. This is a strength that could benefit the galactic community." Lee struggled to his feet, supported by his 3 companions. "What does that mean?" "It means Earth will be invited to join the Galactic Federation as a junior member. You will have access to technologies and knowledge that will help your species continue to develop. In return, you will serve as an example to other worlds of how cooperation can overcome conflict." The 4 humans looked at each other in amazement. Humanity's future had been secured not by weapons or technology, but by the simple act of helping one another. Observer Prime gestured toward the ship's exit. "The test is complete. You will be returned to your lives. But Earth will never be the same. First contact begins now." As they left the alien vessel, Lee realized that his decision to pull Officer Kim from a burning car had changed everything. One moment of choosing to help instead of walking away had saved not just one life, but the entire human race. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest consequences. The D.